Dear job seekers, it's 2026, and yes, robots can do almost everything now. You say you want to work from home. I say you don't even need to show up at all. You work at a snail's pace, at double the cost, using quadruple the space. And then wonder why employers are rethinking the workforce. That's exactly why I created this podcast. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Like and subscribe to learn more.
Welcome back to Working in Ontario. Today's episode is about a phrase job seekers may not be familiar with yet, the Working for Workers Acts. Before we begin, we need to make something very clear.
This podcast is for general information and educational purposes only.
Nothing discussed in this episode should be taken as legal advice, employment advice, or a substitute for speaking directly with a qualified lawyer, paralegal, or regulatory authority.
Employment law is fact-specific. Your rights, obligations, and options can change depending on your role, your employer, your contract, and your individual circumstances.
Laws also evolve. While we strive to provide accurate and current information, legislation, regulations, and enforcement practices may change after this episode is published.
If you need advice about your specific situation, you should seek independent legal advice or contact the appropriate government body.
With that said, let's get into today's episode.
Most people think it's one law, one announcement, one fix. It isn't. It's a series of legislative changes that have been quietly reshaping work in Ontario since 2021.
And if you've applied for a job recently, negotiated an offer, questioned a recruiter, or wondered why postings look different than they used to, you are already living with the effects of these acts.
This episode is not about memorizing bill numbers. It's about understanding why the rules changed, what problems they were trying to solve, and how job seekers should use this information in the real world.
The Working for Workers Acts are a series of Ontario government bills introduced starting in 2021. Instead of rewriting employment law from the ground up, the province chose a layered approach.
Each act amends existing legislation, primarily the Employment Standards Act, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act.
That means these acts don't replace your rights. They modify how those rights apply in a modern labor market.
And that distinction matters, because when people say, "There's a new law," job seekers often assume protection is automatic. It isn't. Understanding how these amendments work is critical.
Ontario's employment laws were written for a world that assumed work was physical, local, and stable. You went to a workplace. A human reviewed your resume. Your employer was easy to identify.
That world eroded slowly and then collapsed quickly. Remote work, platform work, AI hiring tools, international recruitment, mass layoffs, job scams.
The law didn't keep pace, and the gap between how work functioned and how it was regulated became dangerous, especially for job seekers.
The Working for Workers Acts were designed to narrow that gap, not to make work comfortable, but to make it clearer, safer, and harder to abuse.
Are these acts actually about helping workers, or are they just political messaging?
They exist because real problems became too widespread to ignore.
When job scams increase, when non-compete clauses trap workers, when automated hiring hides bias, legislation follows. Not perfectly, but inevitably.
The first act focused on mobility and exploitation. Two major changes stand out.
The restriction of non-compete clauses and the prohibition on charging fees to foreign workers.
Before this act, non-compete clauses were common, even for low-wage or junior roles. Job seekers were asked to sign away future opportunities without realizing the consequences.
The act made most non-compete clauses unenforceable, recognizing that restricting mobility suppresses wages and traps workers.
For job seekers, this changed leverage. You are not supposed to be locked into silence or unemployment simply because you changed jobs.
The ban on charging fees to foreign workers addressed an even darker issue. Recruitment abuse disproportionately affected newcomers desperate for work.
Imagine a job seeker being told, "Everyone signs this," without explanation.
The act doesn't stop employers from asking, it stops them from enforcing, knowing that difference matters.
By 2024, the province shifted focus toward modern hiring practices and digital work.
This act addressed platform workers, tip protection, foreign recruitment oversight, and transparency around AI in hiring.
This matters because job seekers increasingly interact with systems rather than people.
Automated screening tools, digital platforms, and algorithmic ranking quietly shape who gets seen and who doesn't.
Does the law stop employers from using AI to screen applications?
No, it requires disclosure, not prohibition.
The goal is awareness. You deserve to know when automation is involved, not to demand how it works.
This act focused on balance, supporting workers without discouraging employers from operating in Ontario.
It introduced long-term illness leave and reduced certain administrative burdens for businesses.
For job seekers, this signals a key theme. Protection does not mean insulation from market forces.
The province is regulating conduct, not guaranteeing outcomes.
This act introduced some of the most visible changes.
Mandatory AED devices on construction sites, stronger job scam protections, and job-seeking leave during mass terminations.
That last piece matters deeply. Losing a job is not a moment, it's a process.
The law now acknowledges that reality.
Why does it feel harder to get hired if protections increased?
Because compliance slows systems down.
More documentation, more caution, more review. Protection often comes with friction.
Job postings today look different than they did 5 years ago.
Pay ranges, disclosure statements, more standardized language, less personality.
That's not an accident. Employers are reducing legal exposure.
For job seekers, this means fewer emotional signals, but more structural clarity.
If a posting feels vague, does that mean it's illegal?
Not necessarily.
Vagueness is often strategic, not unlawful. Protection has limits.
Even with stronger laws, job scams still exist.
Because enforcement is reactive. The law responds after harm occurs.
That's why awareness matters as much as regulation.
What's the biggest mistake job seekers make with these laws?
Assuming protection is automatic.
The law is a framework, not a safety net.
Ontario's labor market didn't become softer, it became more structured.
Hiring takes longer. Interviews are scripted, risk tolerance is lower.
For job seekers, preparation matters more than optimism. These acts do not guarantee employment.
They do not prevent layoffs. They do not force hiring. They do not replace negotiation.
They create boundaries. What happens inside those boundaries is still shaped by the market.
Read postings carefully. Ask informed questions. Protect your resume.
Know when something feels wrong and trust that instinct.
Preparation is power.
Before we close today's episode, there's one more layer job seekers need to understand, because the Working for Workers Acts do not exist in isolation.
They are part of a much larger regulatory timeline in Ontario, one that includes accessibility law, compliance deadlines, and employer accountability that's been quietly building for over a decade.
That law is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA. And more specifically, its Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation, often referred to as the ISR.
The ISR sets mandatory accessibility requirements for Ontario organizations across 5 key areas: customer service, information and communications, employment, transportation, and the design of public spaces.
These standards apply to employers, recruiters, staffing agencies, and public-facing organizations, including the very systems job seekers interact with when applying for work.
This is not a suggestion-based framework. It's a phased compliance model that required organizations to implement changes over time.
And that timeline matters, because Ontario's target for full accessibility compliance was 2025.
From a job seeker's perspective, accessibility is not just about ramps and elevators.
It affects job postings, application platforms, interview accommodations, testing formats, onboarding materials, and internal communication systems.
Under the ISR, employers must notify applicants that accommodations are available during recruitment, assessment, and hiring processes.
They must provide accessible formats upon request and consider accessibility needs when developing employment practices.
This aligns directly with the Working for Workers Acts, which increasingly focus on transparency, fairness, and process, not just outcomes.
The timing is not accidental.
As hiring becomes more automated, more digital, and more remote, accessibility risks increase.
An inaccessible application portal is not neutral. A timed assessment without accommodation is not neutral. A screening system that cannot adapt is not neutral.
The Working for Workers Acts address fairness and misuse. The ISR addresses access and inclusion.
Together, they reflect a legal recognition that modern hiring systems can exclude without intent, and that intent is no longer the only standard.
If you require accommodation, the law supports your right to request it without penalty.
If an employer fails to communicate accessibility options, that's not a misunderstanding. It's a compliance issue.
However, just like with employment standards, accessibility rights are not self-enforcing.
You still need awareness, documentation, timing, and realistic expectations about how enforcement works.
The Working for Workers Acts and the ISR send the same message.
Work is no longer informal. Hiring is no longer casual, and systems are no longer invisible.
Transparency, accessibility, and documentation are now baseline expectations, not optional values.
For job seekers, this means preparation must include understanding the system, not just selling yourself within it.
When you look at Ontario's labor laws together, employment standards, accessibility, hiring transparency, a pattern becomes clear.
The future of work isn't just about skills, it's about systems, and knowing how to navigate them. The Working for Workers Acts reflect how work has changed, not nostalgia for how it used to be.
They don't promise comfort, they promise structure. That's why this podcast exists, not to scare you, but to prepare you. That's all for today's episode. Thank you for listening.
Like, subscribe, and tune in next week for more episodes on working in Ontario.